Founder FM. You're listening to Founder FM with your host, Graham Brown.
Hello and welcome to Founder FM. My name's Graham Brown. Today I want to introduce you to an author, keynote speaker, angel investor and entrepreneur. We're going to talk about growing a business, selling a business, getting started and staying focused on what matters. Welcome to the show, Tim Fargo.
Hey Graham, how you doing? Thanks for having me on.
It's fantastic having you here. You've got a great history of both starting businesses and selling business. We're going to dive into that in a minute. Let's talk about where you started off, Tim, because you didn't start off, now that you're the founder of Tweet Jukebox, you didn't start off as a tech guy, the classic Stanford graduate in a pair of shorts. Where did it all start for you, Tim?
You mean entrepreneurially?
Yeah, what was your first twinge of entrepreneurial activity in your life? Were you an entrepreneur as a kid, or did it come sort of later in life after you graduated?
Kind of the typical kid stuff. I think part of it was my dad was pretty tough to get money out of, so I quickly figured out that if I wanted to have no questions asked cash, I'd be best off to go out and earn it myself than go to him and have to go through the lengthy and often unproductive explanation of why I needed it.
Right. So you learned the hard way.
Yeah. So, when I wanted stuff, even as a little kid, like if I wanted candy and stuff, it was easier to do odd jobs and stuff for people in the neighborhood and get money that way.
Right. So you carried that work ethic with you to later life. And let's talk about the first real big hit that you had. This was this Omega Insurance Services. We're going way back now. When did you start that business?
That business started in 96.
Right. And what type of business was that?
We did insurance investigations. I actually had done it for about a year and a half with another firm before that. And we had creative differences, as it were. And so I decided to just go do it myself. So anyhow, we were a video surveillance company that did work on bodily injury claims for insurance companies.
Right. So this is a business that was growing fast. You started it in 1996, and you grew that business for the best part of, 7 or 8 years? A bit more?
7 years.
7
years. Just shy of 7 years before we sold it.
Right. So you grew that business for 7 years, but at the peak of that business, you had 200 field investigators, 100 employees. You were the founder of this business. Before you sold that business, what was life like as the CEO, the founder, the owner of that business when you've got this huge staff and you've got all these people out there in the field? Was that kind of what you were in business for? You must have been pretty busy.
It was. I wasn't that busy because I'd built a pretty nice infrastructure around me. But it's interesting. Because the total number of employees was, I think, just over 310 or something like that. But because our field investigators were staff as well, although they didn't come to the office because they were spread all over the country, over the U.S. And but day to day, I really had a great management team, and so I was kind of just turning dials and running a pretty big ship at that point, which was great in some ways, but also not so great in others because I felt pretty disconnected from the actual work, so to speak. I was more just, we need a little more sales to build our backlog a little bit because it was a service business, right? So, we're always trying to keep people busy. But there was a lot of moving parts, but it wasn't, it actually, probably early, it was difficult, and there was a few breakout growth periods that were pretty nuts. But towards the last couple of years were pretty cruise control, but it was also, in terms of ultimately getting rid of it, is a little unnerving to have a business where you have people running around the country doing all kinds of stuff in their vehicles, and there's all kinds of liability issues within the United States running that kind of business. And, you realize you got this huge asset that if something happens to it, you're going to be starting over again. So it kind of, anyhow, but I wasn't I wasn't crazy busy. It was more, and I had a lot of nice people around me. So, I mean, it wasn't, life was actually, was fairly cool.
Fairly comfortable. So why did you then decide to sell that business? Because it was acquired by First Advantage in 2003, right? So if it was a reasonably comfortable business, you had a good management team around you, you were making good money, why did you want to get out?
I really just wanted to unplug from it. I mean, I didn't, like a lot of people say, follow your passion. Well, I can tell you, I didn't really have any like overarching passion for insurance investigations. It just turned out to be a pretty good business opportunity, and I had kind of a skill set, I guess, that allowed me to build that business. But it wasn't like I got up every day and went, wow, how are we going to slay the dragon today? And so it was kind of a risk management decision, just saying like, here, I've got something that's worth a fair whack of money. Do I want to kind of, take that chunk of capital and do something with it, or do I want to keep playing this hand? And and the answer was I wanted to get rid of it. So I mean, we didn't just get acquired. I mean, we put ourselves up for sale.
But you did get acquired eventually.
Yeah, the right bride or whatever, the right acquirer down the aisle, and away we went.
Exactly. So that happened in 2003, and I've been reading your book, Alphabet Success, Keeping It Simple, My Secrets to Success, which I think is it's a great handbook for any entrepreneur, because it's the story of the kind of entrepreneurs that we like on this show, which are not the people who sort of walk out of Stanford University straight into 50 million of funding for their second failed startup. It's the guys who graft from, zero up, right? And one of the things you talk about in your book is you sell this business for $20 million. That point where you go to the ATM, whenever all the deals closed, and you go to the ATM and you put your card in and you pull it out and you get the receipt. Tell us a little bit about that moment, because there's a lot of emotions going on at that time, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I guess there's so many stories I've read about similar kind of things. Like Louis C.K., this American comedian, like once he kind of made it big, he got $100,000 and just put it in his apartment because he just wanted to so he could kind of realize that he'd made it. So for me, was the ATM receipt, right? And so I'd gone, and it was a completely deliberate act. I was like, they put a fair amount of the acquiring price was in cash, so that money got transferred to my account. So I went and did exactly as you described. And, it's just that it kind of brings it home that it really happened, because there's a part of it that, for a kid that grew up in a little industrial town, it seems a little surreal, right? So I needed something to kind of I guess they actually did give me the money. So it was cool. It was.
When that happened, that point when you realized that you had successfully built and sold a business, you'd probably lived that out a number of times before it actually happened in your head, lying in bed at night thinking about this kind of stuff. When it actually happened, was it everything you kind of thought it was going to be?
Yes and no. I mean, I think like a lot of victories you have in life, I mean, it's an awesome, awesome feeling. And obviously, having the money kind of has huge knock-on effects where, your life is transformed by that. But there's also a fairly large ephemeral component that just sort of vanishes. I mean, you have you're on this high for a week or something going, oh my God, I did it. And all of a sudden it's like, yeah, well, now you can get back to being a dad, a husband, you still got stuff, you still have things to do. So, I mean, it's a mixed bag, but I mean, I definitely loved it. There were a certain number of surprises, though, I suppose.
Okay. Well, we'll dig into that in a minute. I want to go back a little bit before we get there, because I think it's important to talk about the journey that you had when you started out in Omega as well. Because I know we talked about building the business, but it wasn't easy from day one, was it? Because there's a story which you tell in your book where you've just started the business, and literally at the first Christmas party, somebody lands a lawsuit on your desk which threatens to derail the whole thing. Can you share with us what happened there and what that was about?
Sure. I'd worked, as I mentioned earlier, in this firm with these other fellows doing insurance investigations, and I was like the finance and systems guy in that business. And so, as I worked there, first I was the finance and systems guy, and then I was finance systems and marketing, and then I was finance systems, marketing, and operations. And then all of a sudden, I kind of looked at the organization chart. There wasn't a whole lot of it that wasn't under me. And I wasn't really being comped on that, et cetera. So I was like, you know what, I'm out of here. And I made a pretty lengthy attempt. I mean, like months of trying to get them to just like, look, just give me some more shares, give me a little bit better comp, and I'll grow this thing. I know how to do this. And they weren't willing to kind of come off the numbers they were at. So I was like, okay, well, this is like, I'm not stupid. I mean, I can just go do it myself, which I did. So shortly after starting, we were getting around the Christmas holidays, and I'd gone up to Alabama, and I was at mingling around, talking to clients and potential clients at this claims party. And somebody, walks up and says, "Hey, Tim Fargo." I'm like, "Yeah, hey." And they're like, "You're served." Suddenly like give me service on a lawsuit. They're suing me for $10 million. And of course, that's gut wrenching. I mean, even if you've done nothing wrong, which I hadn't, but you're still, that doesn't necessarily mean, you don't get to just like walk into court and go, this is meaningless. You still got to fight it, right? So I was a little, right, of course. And so, but these guys, the people who were suing me were just across the room, which was, interesting. So I actually made a joke out of it. I actually walked over to him and I said, if you give someone something around the holidays, generally, you're supposed to wrap it. Because I didn't want to let them know that it bothered me, and so I said that. I kind of had a chuckle, and then I walked away, and I stayed at that party for like an hour, just trying to kind of keep my composure, right? And then I left and I drank a fair whack of tequila, but which didn't really improve things, except in a very temporary way. But but anyhow, I mean, it was a completely baseless lawsuit. I mean, I hadn't done anything wrong. I hadn't signed any contract. I didn't have a non-compete, et cetera, et cetera. They were just steamed that I didn't like capitulate and like just do what they wanted. But I had to go out and hire a top shelf lawyer, and we ended up getting the case dismissed. But it's interesting, like, it doesn't work anything like people see on TV, like where everything is resolved in, like 2 hours. It was a course of months, cost me about $40,000, which I definitely did not have. And I was very fortunate. Will Hancock, who was my attorney, was extraordinarily good and extremely like honest and fair guy. And he also was a complete bulldog, with the suit. So we got lucky, but that was a really daunting thing because, as the beginning of a business is always kind of tenuous anyhow. So, it was really incumbent on me to like have someone like Will, who was expensive, but very good because I needed to focus on the business.
Did that influence you in any way in the way you grew your business, the kind of partnerships and deals that you entered into in the future?
To some degree. I mean, I've always been fairly cautious, but, I also know that when the numbers change, people can change. More money like brings out interesting things in different people. Yeah, I mean, honestly, probably the biggest thing, if there was any chance of me closing shop, when they sued me, that immediately went away because it was like telling me I couldn't do it.
Right. Did you feel you had to prove them wrong?
Yeah. I'm sorry?
Did you feel you had to prove them wrong now?
That kind of stuff doesn't sit well with me. Don't tell me I'm not in the game.
Right. But it's good to have that kind of emotional motivation sometimes, more than just financial, isn't it? Because, sometimes... Oh,
I'd say that kind of motivation kicks the living daylights out of monetary motivation on any day of the week.
Right. So you had this fire, you had some mofos to prove wrong, and you beat them. And one of the things you talk about, one of your themes in the book, is about coming out with your guns blazing. Tell us a little bit about what that's about.
Well, I mean, I think that when you're going to do anything, like when you're in business, I mean, and I guess, I'm, for the people listening, I mean, to me, you've got to be all in. There's not, like when people say, well, I'm doing a side gig, and I'm not saying you can't get something kind of rolling that way, get a little momentum, kind of get the wheels on the car, so to speak, whatever. But at some point, there's going to be, you're never going to eliminate uncertainty, and you just kind of have to go all in. And I think that's what tends to make the difference, and of all the successful people I know, maybe not like every single one, but I can't actually think of one who isn't a bit nutty in terms of being a little bit obsessed about whatever they're working on. And that's kind of what I mean by, it has to be like this singular focus, when you're working on something like that, especially in the early days. Right.
Exactly. I think it's a big mistake, isn't it, that some people make, is that they have this side business and they think, well, I can grow this side business and, maybe it'll work out. Sometimes it does, but for most people it doesn't, because they're not all in, right? Because you need to have that 100% commitment, because the competition are out there have that 100% commitment as a bare minimum, right? So let's have a look at your current gig, which is Tweet Jukebox. You all in on Tweet Jukebox? Tell us a little bit about the story there and why you're now in tech.
Well, that's actually a funny accident, because I got onto social media, onto Twitter, because of my book. And so I was trying to figure out ways to promote the book. And after kind of dabbling into different social networks, Twitter became kind of my go-to network, so to speak. And I found all this scheduling of posts and things to try to build my audience. I found that to be the most ridiculous busy work ever. So after I'd been doing it for a little while, I ended up calling the first person I ever worked for when I got out of college, and also the same, and that it was the same person that had been the head of IT for Omega. And I said, hey, Len, can you build something for me, like that'll have some little databases of content, and it'll, automatically post, because, this is ridiculous. I mean, it's a waste of my time. And so he built it for me. And then, people would comment, right? They'd like, hell, you're on Twitter all the time. You must never sleep. And I was like, oh, I'm sleeping fine. But the system's like very much awake. And so people were asking about it, and, and I thought, finally, the light bulb went off. I was like, what, this actually might be something. Maybe I'm not the only person with this problem. So we put it out as a free product, just to see if people would sign up for it, and I started out asking some people that I knew pretty well on Twitter, and they tried it and liked it, and then more people tried it. And, right now we've got, I think 32,500 signed up users, and about 1,400 paid users. So, I mean, we got a lot of free signups, and then in November, we flipped the switch on, because it was like, okay, this is really cool. We have a lot of free users. I wonder if anyone actually pay for it. Because that can be also a big thing. It's like, free's not, it's a test, I mean, because there's so many things for free now. Just getting people to sign up for something is actually kind of a big deal. But can we pass the next hurdle? Will people part with their hard-earned cash in exchange for this product? So, and they did, in significant enough numbers to actually keep the lights on and all that sort of stuff. So it was like, oh, wow, and I'm still actually, I guess I'm all in, but it's actually, I'm kind of all in and slightly inverted, because I didn't necessarily know that it was going to be a business. So part of me is in a little bit of catch-up mode. But it's, I mean, the system itself is solid. It's just more me doing a couple things. One is just kind of calibrating, like, where are all the best lever points of this business for me, in terms of driving growth, and like looking for, points that could be like bottlenecks and things like that. And also just thinking about, where do you want it to go? I suppose maybe that's, if I had to do my old business over again, I think I would have thought about that more. Like from when I started Omega, I just was like, get big, get big, get big, which was great in a way in terms of selling. But part of the reason I wanted to sell because it was so big and impersonal. So I think this time I'll probably be a little more mindful to keep it smaller. That's just like a value that I have for like what I want for the business now.
When you look at those two businesses that you have or had, so you've got Omega and now you're running Tweet Jukebox, and you're sort of in a high growth stage with that, but you're very mindful of how you're growing it. Obviously, what you've just said, looking at good growth rather than, I suppose, what would be bad growth. Are there any sort of differences between those business? Do you look at Tweet Jukebox and say, wow, this is how things happen here in, the Twitter social media world compared to insurance investigation? I imagine it's a very different world, isn't it? I mean, how do you sort of bring across your business experience there? I'm just curious to know about comparing those two businesses, and how you sort of deal with that.
Well, for right now, I mean, one of the things I actually really like, which probably sounds strange to some people that maybe follow tech business, I do all the customer support myself because I actually really like, for now, and I'm not saying this will be forever, but I really like the interaction with clients. I can see how people use the system. I can see how they think about the system. I have, conversations with them. I mean, either, most of them via email, but, and it attaches me to the work. I think I mentioned that about Omega. I was a little distant from the actual work, but now I'm a little closer to the work. I mean, so I hear what people say, and I can kind of see what goals they're trying to achieve with the software. So I can start tilting in the direction of helping them solve more of their problems, so I become a better value for them. And I think the further up into the ivory tower you get, the easier it is to forget about all that stuff.
For sure. Looking back at Omega, were you a field investigator when you started out?
No, I have no investigative background at all. It was the kind of business where, with all due respect to my former competitors, it was a little bit like in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. It was just a great growth opportunity because it's a business filled with a lot of mom and pops. So if you came in and kind of built an infrastructure and things like that, you had a pretty strong leg up.
Right. Okay. So I'm curious to explore this angle about being involved in talking to your customers as well, and being actually out there in the field, even though you're, sitting behind a computer, talking to Tweet Jukebox customers and getting some kind of feedback. You say you really enjoy that. When you work a lot with startups and you invest and you advise people, do you think founders do this enough? Do you think founders are sometimes scared of talking to customers?
I think a lot of things happen, and including for me. But I think the risks are you don't talk to people, and I actually think one of the biggest problems is people build with too little feedback in the process of building, and they sort of like they go into the garage, so to speak, and they whack together whatever it is, an app or a product, and then they come marching out with it and go, Eureka! Let's introduce it to the market. And I think a much more informed way of doing it is to have that product be kind of developed in part by your market. So you can even kind of conceptually launch a business without really having a product, and based on what people respond to, you can kind of develop it on the fly. I mean, it's a hugely entrepreneurial way of doing something. And so talking to the clients, I think is super important, because ultimately, if it's not something that resonates with them, then, you're really kind of wasting your time, because, I mean, that's kind of the old world business model, isn't it? Where they an engineer or somebody would design a product, and then sales and marketing would get it and figure out a way to try to convince people they wanted it. And that model's kind of breaking now, because there's so many businesses that are designing directly with consumer involvement, so that it's almost built by the customer, like to what they want. So demand is built into the product, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, exactly. That old world way of departmentalizing the whole process, where the sales guys get what effectively is, now their problem, right? Here's the product, you got to sell it, but what you're talking about building Tweet Jukebox is baking the marketing and the customer straight into the product from day one, right? So you're going out there talking to them. How much of your time is taken up with actually talking to and being involved in conversations with customers?
Probably 25 to 30%. And then, I mean, it jumps up when we do a new release because, I'd love to say it never happens, but, we have bugs like anyone else.
Right. And how do you deal with that thing, which I think is the real challenge for entrepreneurs, is when somebody gives you some negative feedback? Because it's going to happen. Whatever you're developing, even if it's the best app in the world, you're going to get problems, right? How do you take that on board? Because I think there's a challenge, isn't there, that somebody's saying something, it can be critical, you're sort of biting your tongue. How do you react to that?
I think you have to really carefully consider the source, and you have to, and it's one of the reasons I actually like doing the support, because complaints come in a couple categories. One is just the person's a goofball, and you're going to get a certain number of those. And to be honest, I've cut a number of people like that loose that just seem like they think in exchange for a monthly fee that I'll become kind of their whipping post. And that's just not on. And I think it's important to not waste your time, because it'll put you in a very bad place having that kind of feedback come through your business and there's some people like that you'll never ever satisfy because they're just not wired to be happy. However, there's another huge subset of people who really are trying to solve a problem and they're frustrated, right? I mean, they took the time to sign up for your product. And this is by far the larger number of people, I can say. I mean, there hasn't been that many people I've gotten rid of. Most people really are trying to solve a problem. They really do care about it. Sometimes they don't articulate it in a particularly kind way. So you have to overlook that. And remember, this is kind of gold. I mean, people spend a lot of money on consumer surveys. So when somebody actually reaches out to you with feedback, you might consider it kind of ore, that you have to distill down to like the actual gold nugget that's in there. So you leave out the swearing bits or whatever, and get down into the pieces of it that are actually beneficial to your business. And sometimes, the people really have an awesome point. And so, I think there's a lot of gold in handling the stuff. But it's important to remember that, like, when people go through, you're not sitting with them, so you have no idea. I mean, they could have had a rotten day. You were the person, they were at the breaking point, and they got frustrated by something with the software, or maybe they're just confused, maybe they're tired. So I think it's very, very important not to take it personally, but quite often there's gold in there, so very valuable stuff.
But the key point is you have to work it, right? You're just getting the ore, which is this, somebody's giving you an opportunity to talk to them, right? And you've got to work it. You've got to kind of ease it out of them a little bit, find out what exactly the root of this problem is. As you said, maybe they're just venting at that stage, they've had a bad day, but that sort of takes the people skills to work with them rather than just sort of dismiss people at the gate. You're sort of letting them in and trying to build a relationship with them long term, right?
Hey, I can tell you some of my biggest advocates were people that, started out a little bit irritated, but they were very often, it was just a matter of it was a point of confusion. And part of that, of course, is my fault because, I mean, the better the software is, the less confusion there would be. But you're absolutely on point that, yeah, getting the feedback and just saying, oh, people don't like that we do this. I mean, you might be able to find a better insight. Like right now, we're getting ready because we're going to become social jukebox, right? So one of the frustration points is when people have multiple jukeboxes, aka databases of content. A lot of people have trouble conceptualizing how to set everything up so it doesn't post on top of each other, right? So I had the programmers build an auto scheduler that does it for them, and that wasn't anything anyone asked for. It was me looking at something that was a common complaint and saying, how can I fix this? And fixing it isn't like making a 3-hour video or a lengthy tutorial or to me, it wasn't like, how do I train them to be better consumers? It's like, create a product that they don't have to do it anymore.
Exactly. Very interesting. I'm curious to know now how you're going to grow, or how you have been growing this business, because one of the things that you have written about in your books and in your blog posts is the power of no, which is that, great brands, great businesses have been able to grow through saying no to opportunities. And this is a challenge that we face as entrepreneurs, because we live in a world of yes, take every opportunity, hunt down every deal, talk to every potential customer. That's how we're sort of trained, indoctrinated from an early age. But you sort of take the contrarian approach here and say, look, no, you've got to say no to these things, because then you're not be able to focus on what really matters. How does that actually play out in your sort of day-to-day life as a business person? And what sort of opportunities have you turned down as a result of that?
Well, look, an example is a lot of people wish we had like analytics, as part of the program. And I'm just not interested in building that in. Maybe down the road we'll be a bigger organization and we'll have the resources to get into building for me, we're a content management and distribution system, period. If you want analytics, there's a load of tools. There's a zillion people that have built great platforms that do that. Twitter even has, some analytics and so on. So, And the number of people that have asked for it is actually kind of small, but it's very easy to give larger voices. Like when people ask you to do something, you think, oh gosh, you like do this mental extrapolation that like, oh, if we add that, we'll get all these people. Maybe not. Maybe you should just do a better job of what you're already doing, and then you'll get more customers that way. And I lean into the second camp. I don't want to be more broad. I'd rather. I have some people that, I get more emails right now on a daily basis that are, I love your system, it's awesome, it's great, than I do any questions or complaints. So, and that's not particularly common. So to me, it's like, let's keep mining that. That's the best marketing I'll ever have, is to make people absolutely ecstatic with the quality of what they're getting. And maybe it won't ever be like a multi-gazillion dollar market, but for me, I don't care. And I think for most people, it's nice to hear all these cash out numbers like, oh yeah, they got $85 billion or whatever. For a lot of businesses, that's never going to happen. And it's good to kind of stay focused on what's going to allow you to be both successful and have a life. And I think no gives you both of those. No allows you to generally be more profitable, and no generally allows you to have a little bit more normal life.
What do you do to stay focused? How do you stay focused in the face of all of this? I imagine, when you were running an insurance investigation business, it was a lot easier than in the tech business, because you're constantly bombarded by stories of these people doing this, or this competitor doing that, or these guys have exited doing this model. How do you, Tim Fargo, stay focused as the business owner on a daily basis? What sort of tips and tricks do you have for people who want to kind of do what you're doing?
I don't read any of those stories anymore. I know that might sound really crazy to people, but I'm motivated enough. I don't need any additional inspiration, and I'm making a decent wage, decent income out of the business. So I don't really need that. And I think that's actually the risk. I think about Warren Buffett, actually, who moved back to Omaha. And one of the reasons, at least that he said, was that there's kind of a groupthink in Wall Street. And I think sometimes when you're in a tech environment, you can get into that too, where you start doing things because everyone else is doing it. You don't even necessarily have your own thought process around it, because you just end up, there's a lot of mimicry that goes on. So for me, and again, maybe only for me, but I just tune that stuff out. I'm very focused in on, like, what are the levers that drive my business forward? What are the things that I can do, that will make a difference? And one of those things, I've been sitting with little pieces of paper and, the smallest mobile that I know is kind of commonly used, like, the dimensions. And I've been making screen after screen, because we need a mobile app to go, because we're a web-based product. So I've been designing that and then like trying to figure out what to leave out. So I, I know you asked a little bit different question, but I stay focused on that stuff because that stuff is what my customers care about. They don't care about me reading about somebody else's exit.
Right. And your customers at the end of the day don't really care if you're based where you are in Florida or Europe or in Silicon Valley. But the temptation is for a lot of entrepreneurs to, hey, we've got to go to Silicon Valley and start up there because then we'll be next to Twitter and so on, right? But you're pretty focused. Do you think that's come from sort of wisdom and experience, having been through an exit as well? You seem to be pretty focused on what people want.
Well, something that I discovered when I was in university, and that was that if I walked into a room before an exam, and to me this kind of is related to what we're talking about, I'd find that the energy in the room would drive me crazy before a test because people would be second guessing everything they read in the textbook, and there was all this nervous energy, and I hated it. So what I would actually do is I would go into the bathroom and just basically hang out in a stall, just waiting and watching my watch. And when I knew they were probably handing out the test, I went in. And my point is, if you can stay out of the noise, I found that to be, my test taking like improved immediately because I didn't have all these like little voices going off in my head, like second guessing. I wonder if I should do it like this, or wonder if I should. I went in with my mindset, the way I wanted to do it, and I stayed focused on that, not on the way someone else was going to do it. And I think it's important to kind of, I'm not saying you shouldn't like try to get ideas from others or whatever, but there's a lot of distractions that kind of pop up in that world as well. So
you got to have your internals or your space, haven't you, where you can keep all that at distance. You can go and dip into that, but come back and regroup and focus, have your space to think. I want to talk about something that you wrote, which I think is quite poignant, and it really struck a message with me as well, is that you wrote a blog post about a Facebook update that your friend had made some time ago. And you'd been so busy at the time that you weren't really checking everything. And a good friend of yours had posted something and he said that their son had died, they passed away. And that suddenly struck you and it made you think hard about all the kind of things which you don't usually think about in business, like, priorities of life and so on. Can you tell us a little bit about that and really what that made you think about in terms of how you were going to go your business as well?
Yeah, I think that was pretty informative. I mean, we're talking about, I'm 55 and this person's a little bit older than me. And, their son who passed away was less than 30. So, and it was completely out of the blue. Yeah. So, you realize that, I mean, not that this is, it's not news, right? This isn't like, oh my gosh, people die. Of course people die, but I think, it's very easy to think that, because especially, I've been very fortunate in my life, like everything's going to work out a certain way, but, life doesn't adhere to the rules you set out for it. It has its own particular rhythm and dance. And so for me, when I got that news, I remembered, that quite recently, and I think I wrote about this as well, my daughter had tried to reach me and I was pretty dismissive. I was like, I was kind of working on something. I was like, I'll get to that. And then, when I took a step back, from this stuff after reading this post, and I realized, the whole reason to be successful, the whole reason to be kind of a master of your own destiny is so that you can connect at the moments when, your loved one, is reaching out to you, not just when, it's convenient because you're not on task trying to, when you're done with your project. Sometimes, the people around you ultimately are more important in many ways than the projects you're working on. I mean, I know I'm not saying to just anytime somebody has a little question that you're going to abandon what you're working on. But anyhow, for me, it was really important to recognize that, the work is for a reason, and the reason is to have a great life with the people around me. I'm not there to just generate cash. That's not the point of the business. The point of the business for me is to have a great life and share that life with the people I care about.
That's great advice. And something we often discover later in life, isn't it? But it's an important lesson for all of us starting out, and an important lesson for everybody of every age. I think sometimes it takes these bolts from the blue or these curveballs to kind of wake us up sometimes. But it's great that you can share your wisdom with entrepreneurs on that path. You know, sometimes they have to go through this kind of adversity to realize these kind of things, right? So is there any sort of advice that you would offer in it, rounding up to young entrepreneurs that you see coming through the ranks these days? You know, we live in a crazy world, so to speak, of startup valuations and people seeking, you know, to build the next Facebook and billion-dollar companies and so on. You know, there's a little bit of detachment from reality here with, you know, the real value of the company. So there's a lot of craziness going on. I know you're a little bit detached from that for yourself, but you see a lot of entrepreneurs contact you, a lot of founders contact you. Are there any kind of common mistakes that you see, advice that you would offer people in starting out?
I think for a lot of people, and, you know, look, I'm sure that people can like provide all the examples of, well, this person did this, but I would say for the average person starting out, even if you do like a Me Too business, you know, I mean, let's take someone who's one of the most revered entrepreneurs, you know, and what I'm advocating here is kind of starting out where the business is kind of an established business and you're going to try to out execute. It's a great chance to kind of get your feet wet, learn business, learn how all the different levers work, and get to know yourself in something before you like, you know, you take on too many kind of unknown variables. But let's take Branson, right? This guy is like always heralded by entrepreneurs as like the most amazing guy. You know, Branson doesn't do a whole lot of new stuff. Branson did records had been done before. Branson did, you know, mobile phones have been done before. He did an airlines have been done before. But he's a great guy for execution. Even I'm a member of his health club, Virgin Active, down in South Africa, right? Awesome health club, great experiences there. So what's he doing? He's not going into businesses where I wonder if this business will make it. He's going into a business where there's definitely money. People are spending money on that thing, right? But what he's doing is he's going in with a different approach, better execution, better branding, and outperforming other people. And for small businesses, that's really easy. And for me, I wish I had done that. Like, I mean, that was kind of Omega, because I had my pie in the sky business that was like kind of an online resume thing before like the internet even existed, which completely imploded because I had no idea what I was doing. But when I got into an established business and just focused on out executing other people, I think that was better and bigger. And I guess, look, I don't want to like try to dilute anyone's like expectations or whatever, but you know, you can have more than one act in all this stuff. And I think for a lot of people, it's like the super duper big idea, lots of running around, lots of raising capital, you know, and there's a lot of ways to like build a business and have a great life, you know, without building like something no one's ever kind of conceived of before.
So what you're saying is find a market or a business where there is established demand and out-execute the existing incumbent players. So, you know, come in with a different approach like Branson, which would be maybe focus more on the experience or the customer service, talk to the customers, and you can make a good business that way rather than trying to focus on the next big thing, you know, and be that first mover in a new market, because you're taking a massive risk. And I think that's very attractive and it gets a lot of column inches in the media, doesn't it? But what you're saying is good advice for entrepreneurs is go out there, find what already works and do it better.
Well, look, and the thing is, if you do that and you have a much better chance of success, and then, you know, you can always go do something big, you know, as well. It's not in lieu of or instead of. You can do that, and then, you know, you could sell it, or you could kind of spin it off to like let someone run. But I think there's an opportunity there to kind of get your feet wet because, you know, I mean, people like to love to talk about Facebook, for instance, and all credit to Zuckerberg. Great business, awesome, doing great. But, you know, these things are really anomalies, you know, and of course, everyone, you know, wants to have kind of their career lottery ticket that they're going to make it to this promised land. But for all the people that make it to that level, there are graveyards filled with people that, I mean, they get funded, they get everything, and, you know, they maybe make a little bit of coin along the way, but they get no traction. It doesn't turn into a business. And I think there's a lot of discouragement there. You know, when you go into something that's a little more established, you have a chance to kind of build your own destiny. But, you know, a lot of I don't know who the original person that said it is, but they, you know, their definition of a pioneer is somebody face down in a mud puddle with an arrow in their back. So, you know, it's not always great to be the first one across the field.
Fantastic. That's great advice. That's Tim Fargo, everybody. Author, keynote speaker, angel investor, and entrepreneur. An inspiration to us entrepreneurs everywhere. Tim, where do we find out more about you?
You can find me at tweetjukebox.com. And you can also, if you're interested in asking me a question, you can write to me directly at tim@tweetjukebox.com. Or if you'd like to hit me up on social media, my handle is actually the name of my book, which is @AlphabetSuccess.
Right. And it's a great book. I've just started reading it. I'm gripped already. You're a good storyteller. So, Tim, great having you on the show. Thanks for sharing your journey with us. And yeah, let's see how Tweet Jukebox grows in the future. It'd be great to get you back on 6-12 months down the line and see how that journey's going and what you can report to us.
Oh, Graham, I'd love that. Thank you.
Founder FM, voice of the entrepreneur. Find out more at www.founderfm.com.